Hi lads, thanks for tuning into the podcast again. Don't forget to like and subscribe and head over to the Patreon to contribute and help us out. Thanks a million and enjoy the podcast. Hello everybody and welcome back to the Norries podcast. I'm James Zenner, joined by my good friend Timmy Long.
Hi everyone.
Rowan is on the decks. How are you, Rowan?
I'm very good.
And we're back in Churchfield and we'll horse straight into it. We have a guest down from Dublin, Trina O'Connor, a community activist, community worker, criminologist. How are you, Katrina?
I'm doing all right.
Trina?
Yeah, that's no worries. I've been called worse, James. Don't worry.
Me too.
I'm really pleased to be down here, and I love what you've done with the place. And I've got a bit of work to be doing now in my place. If you fancy doing some painting, it's a lovely studio.
This time last year, this was nothing like this, but
This was a workshop. I'm a carpenter by trade,
Right.
and I had a bench there back this way. There was a big lathe for cutting timber on the side here, and the place was just a mess. And this is what it is now. I put a toilet in as well.
It's lovely.
We didn't have any of this equipment either. We started small and grew it. But you're down with us, Trina, because you're very knowledgeable and experienced around all things youth justice, drugs, drug policy and stuff like that. But before we get into that, do you want to tell us a little about who you are and where you're from for the people that don't know you?
Yeah, no problem. So I'm from the north side of Dublin, from working class community. Mum and Dad had my sisters and I when they were very young. So by the time Mum was 23, she had 4 babies under 5. Mum and Dad, really funny people, you know, great fun, but also very charitable people. So when they first got together, they didn't have any resources, financial resources, and they were homeless with their children. So they squatted in a couple of flats in Ballymun. You probably heard of Ballymun. And then they eventually heard of a house going in a place called Cabarrick. You've probably heard of Cabarrick. And they squatted in that house as well. But the corporation at the time threatened them with eviction. And they wouldn't leave. They had 4 little girls. So they made a deal with the fella from the corporation that if they left the house, that they would house them somewhere else. So my dad didn't really trust your man. So he said, yeah, all right, I'll leave the house, but I'm staying in a tent in the garden until you house me. So he gave the house back, but wasn't leaving the property. So Mum and Dad used to sleep in the tent, and the lovely neighbours next door, the Peppers, who are still friends of the family now, used to take us 4 girls in at night. Now, I don't really remember that because I was very young. But I do remember, you know, Mum and Dad having a lot of stress in their early marriage. They eventually married when they had me. And then we got moved to Darndale in a corporation house, and Mum really couldn't settle in Darndale at all. So at the time, I don't know if you had it down here in Cork, but certainly in Dublin, people used to do this thing called a transfer, where there'd be a few bob given to somebody to get them to transfer a house. So if you could get a few bob, you could get a better location. So Mum's mother gave her a few bob, and they got a swap to a house in Artane, where I still live today, even though it's a different property now, because I built a little small house in the garden beside my mum. So I suppose growing up in Artane was quite, it's quite like this area actually. Yeah. And there was a lot of problems with addiction in the area that I grew up with. And a lot of the lads that I knew died of AIDS because the virus came in then. And we lost a lot of really talented people. One guy actually, Desi O'D, who I used to write to when he was in prison. Desi taught Larry Mullins to play the drums, or so he used to tell us. Now, I don't know how true it was, because Larry Mullins lived up the road from us. He lived on the posh road at the outskirts of Harmo, you know. Funny story, I remember walking into the Chipper one Christmas Eve, my sister and I, after being in the local pub, and the Chipper was packed. And my sister, she's very funny and very quick. She said to me, watch this. And she ran in and she goes, quick, Larry Mullins is in his garden. The Chipper cleared. She goes, Angelo, 2 singles. And by the time they all came back, we were gone with our chips. She, my sister's class, you know, very funny woman. But that area, I think, one of the things that really helped me and helped some of my friends would have been a local youth club. And it was the St. Vincent de Paul youth club, St. Paul's youth club. And they were interested in us. Now, my mum and dad were very interested in us too. I was very lucky that I had 2 parents that were interested in their children. But they were struggling through life as well. Like, Dad was a bricklayer. So, like, I've lived through maybe 4 recessions now. And, like, whenever there was a recession, trades went. So it was very, you'd know that yourself as a carpenter, you lose out whenever there's a recession. So money would have never been good at times. And Mam was a market trader. Now, she had secretarial skills as well, and she taught my sisters and I how to type so that we would always be able to, earn a living, because she used to do all the invoices and stuff for my dad's friends. A lot of my dad's friends came from a background, same as my dad, where they didn't get a secondary education. They were out of school at 12 and 13. My dad was on a building site in London at 13. Now, he could read and write, but they still needed somebody to help them. His literacy wouldn't have been the best, but he was some mathematician, like he loved the horses, He'd be able to explain the bets to me and I wouldn't have a clue. He passed away at Christmas 2019, unfortunately, at 70. But so growing up in Artane, we ran the roads, we played skipping, kiss chasing, kick the can. I mean, they were just, Mum and Dad used to always come out and turn the rope for the kids on the road, so that my mum and dad believed that they needed to know who our friends were. So we were allowed to bring our friends into the house. Our house was very much kind of like a youth club. So when the youth club was over, everybody came to our house. And then as time went on, Mum and Dad opened a local shop. So we would have had a shop that had a credit book. So if people didn't have the money to pay for, it'd be a tin of beans, a half pound of cans of sausages and a batch loaf. It went on the credit book, on the tick book, and then they'd pay at the end of the week, or they'd pay when they got their butter vouchers. Or their
community spirit.
Mum and Dad had that, And so that's what I grew up with. And when I was in the youth club, I remember I was 16, and it's something when people say to me, what made you become a criminologist? Where does that come from? And it really, for me, it was, they brought a man down from Ballymun, actually, and he was in recovery from addiction, heroin. And he gave us a talk on heroin, and he explained what it did to him and how it brought him down that avenue into criminality and what it stole from him. And it really made me realise how lucky I was. Even though I lived in a working class area, I was rich because I had people around me that were looking out for me. I had youth leaders that were, invested in me and told me that I was special. And I just realised how lucky I was. And it made me think, well, I want to help people that are not as lucky as I am. And that kind of brought me on a path towards theologies, as I say. So, I was just very interested in all theology. So I did an honours degree in psychology and psychotherapy. And then I did a master's degree in criminology. And then I did a second master's degree in comparative criminology and criminal justice systems. Now, before all that, I did certificates and diplomas, because when I left school, there was no free education for third level. You had to pay for it, So I didn't go back to college till I was in my 20s, till I was working. And at that stage, I was working for St. Vincent de Paul. And again, that made me realise what poverty can do to people, to their sense of self and their opportunities and lack of opportunities. And
do you know when you were in school? Imagine around this time now, as you were saying, there was a lot of drug use, the heroin in Dublin as well. We all know about that. Have you lost some schoolmates down through the years? And can you see, was it a good family unit that you had that kind of kept you on the straight and narrow, where maybe some of your peers went down a different path?
Yeah, I think by the grace of being a female actually gave me the upper hand. In the upbringing and in the area that I grew up, because I think that for young males, the pressures, and I know that there's a lot of people who are in addiction that are female also, but I do think particularly nowadays, James, I think for young males, it's an extremely vulnerable time of your life that you can, and there's this toxic masculinity that we have going on in parts of the world, not just in Ireland, where there's a tremendous pressure put on males to man up. And do you know what I mean, Timmy? And
I done my dissertation for my degree on mental health within the construction industry. No, it's a little bit broader than that, but it was about some of the statistics out of it were very, very strong towards the construction industry has more suicides than any other work industry within Ireland. I think it was out of every 4, there was 3 of those were construction workers, and there was a lot of focus as well on the masculine image that men have to portray. You know, the crack no inside and
the
mocking
banter.
fellas.
And the banter is persecutory at times.
But the other side of it is there's that little bit of fear to ask for help. You know, to say that there's actually a problem with their mental health and stuff, and it's ridiculous, to be honest with you, because I see it on site every day. There's something there for a safe pass for physical health. There's nothing there for mental health.
No.
You know,
and another slant on that masculinity thing is, you know, when we were growing up, I speak for myself, when I was growing up, like, the role models that I looked up to in the area was the people that was using drugs, the drug dealers. My idea of what a man was, and, you know, he didn't work with a very negative perspective on employment. A real man, you know, you meet any adversity with aggression and confrontation. And when I was in rehab in St. Francis Farm, challenged on all these things, like, and so when you get a bit mature, you look back and think a very warped sense of who I am, what a man is, and, you know, what it is to be a masculine person, you know, in this community. You know, we kind of socialise that way, you know.
Yeah, and I think actually in terms of for males growing up in that toxic masculinity, and that is an adverse childhood experience. And one of the things that we've seen out this pandemic is the increase in domestic violence. Now, I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that it's just males perpetrating against females, but the statistics will show that in the main it is.
Yeah.
And I think for young boys growing up in them environments, that's extremely difficult and challenging and complex, because you love your dad, but he's causing pain and harm to your mum and possibly you. So there's a frustration around that. And then you also want to be like him, because young boys want to be like daddy. So there's a kind of a complexity around how you shape who you are. And if you show weakness in a domestic violence situation, then you suffer even worse. So you have to physically stand up. Like, we've seen an increase, like all the crime statistics will tell you that crime is down. The only one that's up is domestic violence. Now some seizures of weapons and stuff is up, but in terms of what we're talking about here, it's domestic violence. So let's kind of frame this in a pandemic. So stay safe, stay home. For many people, being home has been the unsafest place for them. And all that unresolved trauma will come out. So when a young person is acting out in you know, throwing stones or doing a bit of shoplifting or all of these things, and people are like, what's wrong with him, what's wrong with her, they need to be asking what's happened to that young person, and what can we do as a humanistic approach to resolve that trauma for young people. Because, like, the reality is, if we don't do it, it's going to cost us more economically in the long run, and young lives are going to be destroyed. And it really troubles me that in everything, and we're still in a pandemic, that there's no conversation around the mental health of people coming out of this pandemic. Not just young people, I'm talking about people that have lost their jobs, that were furloughed, that may never work again, and are only in their 30s and are on the scrap heap because they worked in bars or whatever, and that's gone. Like, I really feel, and I feel strongly about this, that we had a NEFA approach, a health-led approach to a pandemic, which was right. We have a pandemic in this country. We have a pandemic of addiction, and we have a pandemic of violence, whether it be domestic violence or violence on the streets. We need a public health-led approach. It needs to be brought together with all the experts to create a action plan to deal with it. Not in 5 years' time. We need it happening now. And it's very poor that we have a government that's just looking at just the health implications and just looking at the economic and mental health. You just don't hear it, Timmy.
It'll come out though. It'll come out in the next, like, this pandemic now, all these, everybody will be vaccinated, and listen, it'll be forgotten in about a year or so, whatever. But what we're going to be left with are addiction problems and mental health problems. Like, you brought up a point there. You know, some people are physical workers, and some people can sit in an office. I'm physical because I need to be kept busy, because that needs to be busy, you know. And there's so many people like me. And for people like me that were in the construction industry to lose their jobs, the one thing that keeps them going every single day, to be told, right, you have to go home. They're sitting at home and they're bored. They can't sit still. A lot of them might have undiagnosed problems, ADHD or whatever, you know, and just and they're sitting at home, and what are they going to do? For boredom, they're going to drink. They're going to drug because they can't handle what's going on inside in their head. You know, they're dealing with stuff that they didn't have to deal with in the past because they were constantly on move. You know, and now they're at home, and you know, these are all the things that are going to be coming at the forefront. And maybe not now because people are just happy to get back, but they will be coming back. You know, there will be struggles over everything that has gone on in the last 18 months.
Yeah.
Do you think we got the balance, or the government got the balance wrong in terms of protecting people from COVID, but it was probably, maybe the collateral damage was probably worse than COVID?
I don't think the collateral damage has to be worse. I think if it was managed properly, and I still think there's an opportunity to do that. I still think that we can, even now or tomorrow or next week, sit down and work out a recovery plan for people's mental health. But I think it needs to happen. In terms of the balance, look, would you have wanted to be in government when this was going on?
They were damned if they didn't, damned if they didn't.
I do think that there was a huge lack in women at the table, and I think because of that, a lot of critical pieces were missed. We even now have a stage where still some hospitals will not allow partners in when the woman is given birth. And that's very wrong. And I think we are a patriarchal society. We've got some loosening around the edges, but as a woman growing up, like in the 80s, I was threatened to be brought to the priest, you know. I was threatened to, you know, somebody would say, you know, we put you in a Magdalene if you keep it up. And that could have happened. And I'm not that old, like I'm not 50 yet, you know, so like we still are in a patriarchal society, and it really it aggravated me when I would see these press conferences and just man after man making decisions, no females. And when you look at some of the females that were in power around the world, my sister lives in New Zealand, so I look
they
at
were like
Jacinda.
the shining light.
I mean, yeah, but now they're gone a bit communist. Like it's gone a bit hoop and Annie over there. Like they've really slacked off on the vaccine. But in terms of controlling the virus, there was a very holistic approach to it. And I think for Ireland, and like, I mean, as I say, being in government would have been very difficult for anybody. But I do think that some of the decisions that they had to make were very hard decisions. I wouldn't have wanted to make them. But I think now we need to now scale back and start looking at the big picture, like you say, the collateral damage. Because realistically, even if you want to look at it in economical terms, when we invest €1 into early intervention through whatever social issue that we're talking about, we save the Exchequer €4 in post-intervention. And the World Health Organization will tell you that. So we know that. So I just sometimes don't get why we have people in power acting in a reactive way when we've got people like you, other podcasts, people on the media speaking to these issues and saying, this is coming down the track, it's going to come out some way. Why is there not that power from our voices? We're having the lived experience. We're seeing what's happening in communities. Communities always know the answers, you know?
It's like the government, the people in government, why don't they have somebody by their side from working class areas giving them advice about working class areas instead of taking advice and just going off the top of their own heads? Like,
I just think the people in power aren't from these areas, and they're not directly affected for the most part by the issues we talk about, so then they're quite detached, and maybe the will isn't there, you know, but that's why you need more working class people in government, you know.
Yeah, I agree. And like, I don't know if it's that they're just detached. I actually, and I firmly believe this, I think they think we're exaggerating when we tell them some of the stuff we tell them. Because it's so obscene, some of the conditions that some of our working class people live in, and some of our travelling community live in, and some of the barriers that they have to get through in life, that I think they think we're exaggerating. And as a female, you can be accused of being dramatic. And I'm a very passionate woman, and I'm a very, vivacious woman. So I can get very excited, but I won't change that for anyone. But I do know when I speak to sometimes people in power, they kind of go, she's off the wall. She's exaggerating. Like, I'm currently trying to organise a joint webinar between the UK police force and the Irish police force. And some of the guards on Garda Síochána here are really up for it. I wrote to a couple of people in power, and I'm not going to say who. And I got an email back from one of them to say, that's not a problem here. We don't have that problem here. So the webinar was about cuckooing. And I'll speak to that if you don't mind for a minute. So cuckooing of people's houses. So in Dublin at the moment and around Tala and Ballymun. Cuckooing, like like the cuckoo comes in and takes the nest, and then they kill all the other birds. Young, and then they keep the nest. So we in Dublin, it's estimated that we have about recognised and kind of have been identified about 100 properties on a kind of a rolling scale that are taken over. So what happens is you might get somebody who's a vulnerable adult. So somebody who's living in social housing and they're vulnerable, they might have an issue that they need support with. And they can become very useful to an organised crime gang. So somebody will befriend them and then they say, listen, can I just hang out in your house for a couple of hours? I just need to make a few phone calls. And then all of a sudden that young person's house or property is taken over and it becomes a drug den. So that happens in a lot. Does it happen here in Cork?
Yeah, I'm thinking of my own situation now. When I was in the throes of addiction, I used to live with my ex at the time, who I won't name for obvious reasons, but these lads who I thought would have been friends at the time, but I was in the throes of addiction. And looking back, I was being used,
Yeah.
But they used to be, I don't want to say it now that I might incriminate myself, could I be prosecuted? But just say I was in a situation like that where the house was being used to take drugs in from couriers coming from Dublin, cut it. I was getting what would only be described as a tiny piece of drugs and a few quid to keep me hush-hush. But if the gaff was raided,
it was all going to go on you.
It was always on me, do you know what I mean? But and it starts off friendly, but then you kind of don't really have a choice.
That's it. So it's grooming, isn't it? And it's coercive control because you're in addiction. So that's one of the ways that a house can be cocooned. So a vulnerable adult, somebody in addiction. Another way that can happen is it can be an intimate partner. So your partner, say somebody who maybe, say, lost their job during the pandemic and found themselves going down the road trying to keep a few bob to keep the roof over their head. They then will develop a kind of a control over the house, and the partner, the intimate partner, can't really say anything because this is the person you love, and so you're now implicated in their criminal behaviour. Now it could be possible as well that maybe they're in debt bondage to their dealer. So if you're in debt bondage to a dealer, you have to do what they ask you. You're now in a modern day slavery situation, and we have no law in this country against this. The UK have it. So I'm trying to set up this webinar, and I had somebody in power tell me doesn't happen in this country. I think you're over exaggerating there. And I could talk about it forever, but that is a serious issue. And going back to what you were saying about them being detached, I genuinely believe, James, that they don't get how bad it is for some people.
You're actually right in what you're saying, because it's very timely. There's a halting site in Blackpool not far from here called Springlin, and it's probably one of the worst halting sites in Ireland for the conditions that people are living in down there, right? And the Ombudsman for Children did a report, and it was released yesterday, and it was a very damning report now on the state, on the council and everybody involved. On the media and the radio, the newspapers and all this councillor who represents that area, who I won't name because I don't want to give him, I don't want to verbalise his name to give him any attention. He's challenging the Ombudsman's report. He's like, the Ombudsman now is the ultimate authority on anything related to children's rights. And he said the Ombudsman was overreacting. If it was so bad, why aren't they taking the kids? And this stirs up all this cruelty man history, Like, fucking, you wouldn't believe it.
And you do know that line, if it's so bad, why aren't you taking the kids? That's like, be careful what you're saying here, because we might take your kids. And that's what the Catholic Church did to working class people their whole lives. Like my grandfather had scars on his back from the cat o' nine tails, where when his mother died, him and his siblings were put in an industrial school. Like, so, this is a control of working class people. We have power. Be careful what you say. Why don't we take the kids if it's that bad? Like, see that narrative? I don't like that. And that's about an abuse of power.
That's sick in my eyes, like that kind of talk from someone in authority to say something like that.
And they're innocent children. Do you know what I mean? They are innocent children.
Can you imagine how scared them children would be if they heard that and worked out what that meant? Are we at risk of being taken? Imagine the trauma for a child.
Yeah, but no, there's the other side of it too. Like, if there's a child really kind of being affected by whatever's going on anywhere. And the right thing to do is probably give the child a bit of respite or a break.
The right thing to do is give the family proper conditions to live in. That's the right thing to do. Separating children from their families because of a social construction that people in power have put in place, that's not acceptable to me.
Yeah.
Like we are a very wealthy country. We're not, and we can borrow money at 0% rates right now. Like, look at the homeless problem that we have. I worked in Dublin Simon community as well, right back a number of years ago, and my experiences of homelessness then and what we have now is down to, in my view, policy decisions that have been made. Not because anything else has changed, just policy decisions that have been made. And when I worked in Dublin Simon, we were working towards eradicating homelessness, and we were close to that. But you didn't see homeless families. Now, Focus did work with homeless families. I worked for Dublin Simon, but you would probably be able to count the homeless families on two hands because it was so obscene to us to believe that. Where we now, how have these conditions become so normalised that we accept them?
It just shouldn't happen in a country with the status we have in this country and the wealth that is in the country. Kids should never be homeless.
No.
There shouldn't be never a child homeless.
No.
Our family for that matter, and for our government to be sitting in their leather chairs in the dial or whatever, like
in the convention centre, 25 grand a day.
They put a footbridge in Cork City there, the Mary Ellam's Bridge. It's a lovely bridge. They didn't fucking need it. There was a bridge 100 yards that way. Do you know what I mean? How much money? Like you're wondering, like, who's making the decisions on stuff like this? But another thing you mentioned around, I worked in Cork Simon community, and I'm still involved there. Let's say at kind of board level there, but like people in Cork, especially on the radio stations, the talk shows, we've the heroin problem in Cork is getting worse and worse and worse. But if you look at the data around, people being arrested for possession, people attending treatment for heroin use, kind of stagnated in 2014, 2015. But what has happened is homelessness has increased and it's more visible. Like, it's not that heroin is getting worse, people are just becoming homeless. And traditionally, and you'll speak to this, traditionally if somebody got into if the drug use got out of control, they lost their gaff, come into the Simon, try stabilise them, save up for a deposit, move them into a bedsitter apartment. You can't do that with people anymore. So now they come into homeless services and there's nowhere to move them onto because the apartments are so expensive. You have the likes of Amazon, Apple Computers, Google, Facebook employees all vying for those same apartments with cash, and how you're trying to get a fellow out of homelessness with his hat and his few quid in his pocket. You have no hope, do you know what I mean? So it's like and then you families turning up in being housed in B&Bs, and a charity as well in Cork here, Penny Dinners. We had the manager on here before, and you've working men, right, that's working, and he barely pays mortgage and feed his kids, and he comes to the penny dinners to get fed himself. Like, that's very sad.
Well, it's very wrong. I mean, the penny dinners are amazing. I mean, they're just a phenomenal place, aren't they? And we have in Dublin the penny dinner equivalent, the stew house there. My mum's family would have went to the stew house because my parents come from big families. So, dad was 15 siblings and mum was 10.
They're the families of the day, aren't they? Back in the time, like. They were big families.
Big families, big Catholic families. The poor old women. Then
they were different, though. They were a different breed, like. The women
just
back
got
then.
on with it.
There was never.
They
only complained.
Not like us weak feminists now.
I think families in general just
the only time the women back then would complain is the aches and pains. I remember my grandmother, she was notorious for fucking ache.
Everything was aching. How many kids did she
probably
have?
spent
my
4 years.
9.
9.
She had 9, yeah.
Jesus.
She had 9. My mother and 8 brothers and sisters.
Oh, God. Wow.
And there's 11 on my nan's side. 11. Like, imagine spending 99 months of your life pregnant. That'd give you fucking aches and pains.
I tell you, would,
there's a family down the road here. I think there was 21 or 22.
There was a family beside my ma in Donecarney. My ma's family came to the tenements in the inner city and then were moved out to Donecarney, and there was 22 children.
Jesus Christ.
22 children in a 2-bedroom house in Donecarney.
And you know what? Those women back then, they managed. They got by and they fed them kids. you know.
Yeah, but they had no lives.
They had no lives,
Like as
right?
a woman, like my grandmother, my mother's mother was so intelligent, but she had no access to education. And had she have had access to education, because she ran her own business at a time when women had no kind of agency, weren't allowed, but she had to because her husband was an awful man for the money, you know, so she ran her own business. But she was very unusual. But my mother runs her own business. My mother's, you know, in her late 60s, I won't say her full age, she'd kill me. And all my sisters, like my dad has 7 daughters, no sons, 3 different women. I have 2 mixed race baby sisters because my mum and dad divorced and my dad remarried a woman, Charity, my stepmother. She's gorgeous, but she was 20 years younger than my dad. And they have 2. I have a sister who's 20 on Saturday and another sister that's
Happy
16
birthday.
for Josephine. Yeah, she'll kill me. Josephine's in minute at the minute. But my dad reared 7 very, very strong women because he saw his mother not having any opportunities in life. And that's what women were just about, being at home. Like, and that's one of the things I would be campaigning about, removing, I think it's Article 41.3 or 43.1, whatever it is, woman's place in the home. I mean, how dare they still have that?
That's still...
It's still in the Constitution. Like, so a woman's place is to support the state by being in the home. So now there is a repeal kind of campaign going, and you'll probably see me at some stage with a placard standing somewhere, because it really shouldn't be there. But we need a referendum to remove it, you know.
And it will happen.
It will. I think the Citizens' Assembly have recommended that it's removed, but we'll take a referendum to remove it.
Yeah. Can I talk to you a little bit about youth crime and offending behaviour? Sometimes, when I'm thinking about my own, like as an adult today, I know, right, and I've a good job, have this podcast, respected I feel like in my city I feel very much a part of everything, you know. I feel like part of the mainstream, you know what I mean? I can do kind of pretty much what I want to do within the guidelines of the law, and I feel part of something, you know. But when I was a young person, when I look at the things I did as a young person in me teens and early 20s and stuff, the antisocial behaviour, the drug dealing, the joyriding, the drug use, all that stuff, you know, like I didn't give a fuck, to be honest with you. I didn't care about the damage I was causing to people. I think, like, if somebody burgled my house, how would I feel? If somebody robbed my car, how would I feel? But when I was young, like, I never felt part of the mainstream. The things I have today, you know, like yourself, you know, the education piece, and I never felt that was ever there for me, and I resented people who had it, you know. And I think that social exclusion kind of almost gave us, do you know what, fuck all them over that side of the city, and I'm going to rob their cars.
I want to watch the world burn.
Yeah.
And you can understand that, can't you? Because now as an adult looking back, you can identify what them issues were for you. So if people feel disenfranchised, if a young person feels disenfranchised by the world, so if I say to a young person, did you vote in this election? And they go, what would my vote matter? It's only one. If they're not engaged with the process, like within our education system, even in secondary education, we have something that's missing, and we had it when I was in school: civics. So a lot of people don't even understand how the electoral system works, and a lot of politicians won't canvass areas where the turnout is low. Like, who would blame them? If you're somebody and you only have an amount of time to work out how you're going to get yourself voted back in, because politics is parochial. It's about getting the right numbers. You know, you have to reach this number. You know, if you canvass this estate, you'll hit the quota. You can't blame people being, I suppose, constructive with their time and being kind of creative with how they're going to get back into government. And that's why when you have areas, like a lot of the work I did in the northeast inner city, a lot of them people have one of the lowest electoral kind of turnouts.
Same hell.
So, and you'll find that. So it frustrates me sometimes when I hear people saying nothing changes anyway. And I go, I will drive you to the polling station. Please vote. Because if people don't vote, if people don't use their franchise to vote, then they cannot have any impact on future decisions. Like if somebody canvasses at your door, you need to ask them, what are you doing for young people of this area? Not nationally, of this area, of this road, of this estate. Because for me, the key is whenever national decisions or national policies are created and designed, there isn't enough room for nuance, and there isn't enough room for community culture and the issues that are facing certain pockets around the country. So what is affecting parts of Dublin may not be affect parts of Limerick, and vice versa. So we do need to have some sort of measurement where we can create a tool that is flexible and adaptable enough to deal with emerging issues. And for young people today, one of the biggest emerging issues is, in my view, the recruitment of young people into criminal behaviour. For all sorts of reasons, like I mentioned earlier, like debt bondage or toxic masculinity or boredom or feeling disenfranchised or actually feeling like being part of a group is safer than being outside of that group, or looking for some sort of surrogate family, looking for somebody who cares for them. These people will tell them that they care about them. They're going to look after them. They'll throw them a few bob. And then all of a sudden that young child is in something that is way above, because they're very useful. So it makes sense.
Young people like that are ballsy as well. And they'll carry drugs and weapons, you know, and they get the credit and, you know, they'll...
And you get kudos then, and you get the hard man, and then nobody messes with you. So if you're somebody who's been bullied in the home or being bullied on the street, and all of a sudden you're with, you know, Trina, the hard woman, nobody will touch you then it makes sense, doesn't it? There's also a protection piece there. And that's quite critical thinking of young people. So if you're growing up somewhere that's, you know, a tough place to be, and you can align yourself with somebody that nobody else will touch, and then the problem is you then get them self-medicating their pain by starting to use drugs. And the problem that we have in this country is how we criminalise young people before they have a chance to self-actualise. So young people who are criminalised because they're smoking a bit of grass or smoking a bit of hash. I mean, we really need to be looking at the Portuguese model. We need to be looking at what's done there. I mean, I was very conflicted with the whole Portuguese model there for a while. And then I know Tony Duffin very well from Anna Liffey, because Tony and I worked in Dublin Simon at the same time. So that's how far back we go. And I asked Tony to explain to me the Portuguese model. And when he explained it to me, I was just like, why are we not doing this?
I know.
You know, like, and now before that, I was thinking, oh, you know, hash can cause schizophrenia and somebody who has a predisposition, because I'd read all the medical journals. And by the way, that is not a true reflection, you know, and that is something that people hear. But there is medical research into these things, and it's like everything else. You can read one thing and just go down that rabbit hole, but when you hear about what's happening in Portugal, why are we not doing that here?
We had I don't know if you know Dr. Gabor Mate.
Amazing.
We had him on the podcast a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I watched it, guys, and I met him in Dublin Castle one time. I mean, he's a
gent, isn't he?
He's just got this air about him, regalness. I think Tony introduced me to him, actually. He's just got this almost Gandhi-like presence. Do you know?
And he's just a legend, like, he's and so humble. But something we spoke about the Portuguese model, and he was talking about the frustrations of the whole lot now, like, because he was saying, like, the science is behind it. He was saying he was in front of a Senate in the Parliament in Canada, and they were asking him about evidence-based practices and evidence-based treatments, and he was like talking about, you know, working with drug users and stuff, and he was saying me on, and they weren't interested, and he was saying, like, you're asking me about evidence-based practice and evidence-based treatment, but you don't practice evidence-based policies. The policy is driven by ideology. And it's not that the science doesn't back the Portuguese model, and in Germany they have a different one where there's no kind of, it's just decriminalisation, and there's different forms of it, and legalisation in Canada for cannabis and Uruguay and stuff. It's not that the science isn't there. It just doesn't fit with the ideology of the Conservatives.
Well, it's the narrative, isn't it? If they come out, if any of the parties that are in power come out and appear to be soft on crime, and because that's what they're afraid of, this is about being soft on crime, like, they will be fearful for their position. But being hard on crime is not about criminalising young people. Like, nobody wants criminals to get away with criminal behaviour. But what I want is an opportunity to let young people have be able to make a mistake. So if you're somebody from inner city Dublin who makes a mistake, and you come from a background where there might be addiction in the background and some other social issues, you're treated in a very different way to a young lad who comes from a background where there's social capital, where there's people there that can point you in the right direction or get you a barrister so that you avoid being brought into the criminal justice system. So you can make a mistake and be treated in a different way to somebody who comes. So immediately that young person, I mean, thanks be to God there wasn't social media when I was a teenager.
I know, we always say that.
You know, the pressures.
Be ruined.
Like you wouldn't come back from it. No. And I know some young people have put things out on social media and it really is difficult for them to come back from, like what they're growing up with. But making a mistake, like, you know, experimenting with drugs. And most people, if they're honest, will tell you they have done. Like most people I know have
Even
done.
Leo. Even Leo Varadkar admitted
well,
it.
Leo admitted. I mean, we've all had a joint pass to us at least once at a party.
Everybody has tried something at some stage, you know.
But it's what happens with the criminal justice system, depending on your resources, that then dictates where you go. Because if you're 13 or 14 and you're criminalised, you can understand why you might say to yourself, well, if I'm going to be a criminal, I'm going to be the best bloody criminal going. And you're going to then get in deeper and deeper. And then you're going to lose your connection with civil society. And when there's not connection with your community and with civil society, like you were speaking to earlier, James, about, you know, you were like, feck them, I don't care. I get that because you were in pain. You were obviously in pain because you were in addiction and nobody was helping you, you know, so you just wanted to cause pain to other people. Psychologically, that makes sense, and it makes sense to anyone who's listening. If you're in pain, you want other people to be in pain because they're not listening to your pain. And let's be honest, drugs are the best painkiller.
Yeah, it's like Garamata says, it's not why the addiction, it's why the pain. You know, it's where is the pain coming from? You know, and there's a fantastic book that goes by
Bruce Perry.
No, not Bruce Perry.
That one at the moment.
Johann Hari. He travels the world and looks at the war on drugs in different countries, and he went to Portugal,
Chasing the Scream. Chasing the Scream.
Right.
What a fantastic book.
Really?
It explains how the war on drugs started initially back in the 1920s in the US, where it was initially a war on alcohol.
Yeah, the prohibition.
And when the alcohol, the prohibition stopped and the alcohol, then there was this guy, his name is Harry Hassinger, or something like that. And he just disliked the Hispanic people and the African American people because of they used to smoke weed and whatever.
And they were very relaxed and chilled out
and the Chinese with the
he
opium.
was racist. He was an out and out racist.
Yeah.
And that was his way of just coming down on top of them. And he was an authority figure. He had a lot of power within the government over there, and that's how it started. And for other countries then within Europe and everything else, for them to be a part of the Americans, be connected to them, allies, they were told that they had to introduce these policies, you know, around drug addiction. Drugs had to be taken out, like in England was one, and I know there was another few European countries.
So it's all been driven by ideology, this whole, you know, war on drugs. But even within that then, like in the UK, they had heroin assisted treatment. Where like if somebody with a chronic opiate addiction where other forms of treatment hasn't worked, the GP would prescribe them heroin in the clinic and you know, administer it for them, and it's supervised and everything, and they can live, you know, full lives and, you know, do whatever. Do you think that could work in Ireland? Or
I think we need to do something different, and we think we need to do something radical, and I think we need to acknowledge that we're going to lose several generations if we don't step in. And I remember years ago watching the Late Late Show when I was a teenager, and I remember there was a journalist on, and he quoted Larry Dunn, who was a very well-known criminal in Dublin, and when he was being sent down, he said something along the lines of, you think I'm bad, wait and you see what's coming after me. And he was right, and I think the reason why he was right was because we don't have just traumatised children, we have intergenerational trauma on trauma on trauma, and we're now from the 70s, 4 or 5 generations from the heroin when it came into this country, late 70s, early 80s, and we have children that have been reared in households where people are struggling and there's unresolved trauma for them, and then we don't have the scaffolding around them young people with social services because it's not joined up. And I think that that's where we're failing our young people. And when a young person is, like when you see some of the social media stuff that we've seen, violence in young people, and it's horrendous, and they're victims, and you worry. Like I used the dart all the time. I thought, Jesus, how would I feel if that was me? And that is very troubling for people. But that doesn't mean that we should then look at them young people and go, well, they're scum. And we shouldn't label them young people. We need to start asking, how can we assist these young people to become pro-social members of society, to understand that antisocial behaviour like that and violent behaviour, because the levels of violence trouble me. Very much so, because violence only goes one way. It doesn't de-escalate. Violence gets worse and worse and worse. And children that are being involved in violence will become desensitised and become even more violent, or if they're suffering violence themselves through their peers. And that's another thing that happens in organised crime gangs. Young people will be initiated into the gang by being beaten by the other members of the gang, or threatened with a beating. Like, people talk about young boys being beaten by hammers, and that's acceptable now in certain cohorts. I mean, like, that's awful. Like
the important thing here, Trina, really to look at is these young boys, teenagers that are doing these things, they've been completely left down by society and the government in this country.
Yeah.
You know, and different people in their own lives growing up. You know, and I'm saying there's no, you know, from my own experience and stuff, like, but they're then being labelled and attacked by people because, as you said, they're scum, they're this, they're that, and the other. You're not going to ever be anything.
Yeah.
That's just fucking throwing them straight down the road again and just throwing them, you know, in where? Yeah. Into a fucking bin, like, and just saying you're no good.
13-year-old, you're washed up. Yeah. Rather than we fecked up with the conditions you're living in, with the construction of your community, with the lack of resources, with the lack of access to education, with the lack of support for your parents. We hear this narrative. What about their parents? It's not society's responsibility to rear these children. No, it's not. But what it is as a society, we have a responsibility to own up when we messed up. And when we have communities where there's trauma that's unresolved, where we have addiction and there's no services, where we have people living in homelessness, where we have people living with mental health issues and no support, we as a society are responsible. And that's what's going on in this country, in parts of this country.
There's no education around addiction. There's no education around trauma. There's no, and they're both connected. Mental health, trauma, addiction. There should be education around all of it for parents, for teenagers in school, just for some of them to have that light switch go off in the head. Don't you know what? I'm doing this at home. I should stop that because this might happen down the line with the child. He might develop.
Like a restorative approach, Timmy. Like restorative processes allow young people to repair the harm. Like when you two guys came back into society, was there a pathway for you for reintegration back into your society and your community? I know there are services available, but the reality is you had to find your way. Now, if we're going to really rehabilitate people, we have to understand that once you finish your sentence, that you're going to need supports. And I know there are supports there, but for young people, say, another cohort that really worries me is young people that are in care. So, you know, the way earlier we were talking about saying, oh, we need to take them into care. When that young person turns 18, all of a sudden they're an adult and they're out on their ear.
And they're way overrepresented in homeless services.
Yeah, they
are.
And like, they don't stop being vulnerable because they're 18. They're probably even more vulnerable now that they're 18 because now they'll have access and they'll have capital, like where they might have a resource like a property, or they might have money coming in, so they're even more useful. And the reality is, for the brain, when we look at, you know, the functioning of the brain, when we look at the damage that trauma does physiologically to the brain, we have young people growing up that might be 25 but may only have the emotional maturity of a 14 or 15-year-old.
And I'll put my hand up there.
Particularly
that
if
was
you're
me.
using drugs.
Do you know, when I stopped using drugs at the age of 30, I remember walking on the yard at a prison in the Midlands, walking, and I felt like an 8-year-old child, even younger. I could not have a conversation with another human being because I had no vocabulary, I had no self-esteem, I had no confidence. And when I put down the one thing that kept me alive for 20 odd years of my life, it was like, oh my God, what the fuck, like. And I was literally completely destroyed inside the cell, where I every day thought about taking my own life because I couldn't manage my own stuff, my own trauma, but and that's when I found meditation, which is a different story. But going back to the point of it, it's just, I'm after losing my fucking train of thought.
But like what you're talking about there, when I detox.
It's tough what you were talking about, Tim.
It is tough stuff. But a lot of people, when they do stop using, they are left with that child that was stunted at a young age, and now they're left in the big world. They haven't got the crutch of alcohol or drugs anymore, and
people expect you to have
be an adult,
to be
and stand up,
and to have critical thinking.
But
when you start using drugs, probably because of trauma, you will have split thinking. So you only think in black and white, and that grey thinking only comes with work that we do on ourselves. And like I said this on another podcast, and I'm sure you'll probably get what I'm saying here. I said, if you want to know if somebody suffered trauma in their childhood, you need to ask them to tell you about the day they grew up. And if they start telling you, then you know they had trauma, because most people do not remember the day they grew up, because growing up is a gradual process and in the normal lifespan. Not to say it's abnormal, but it's in most people, they grow up gradually. But you ask somebody about the day they grew up, they can tell you, and it's usually because of a trauma. And that's where you get stunted emotionally, and you lose that critical thinking, because you have to think in black and white, because it's about protection. Because when you're growing up in that environment where you've got stressors, toxic stress coming at you from all different kind of angles, then in order for you to survive, like, you're survivors because you were able to survive, and may have taken drugs as a crutch for a time, but now you're in this situation, and your vocabulary is fan-dabby-dozy now, Timmy.
It's not too bad.
There was when I was doing me college,
I do get stuck at times. But
when I was doing me college, there was this one psychology theory that I found very helpful to explain that for me, because like Timmy, I felt I turned 14, 15, and I didn't age out of I felt 14, 15. I was wearing the same clothes, the same behaviour, was doing the same thing, 27, but there's the Eric Erickson, he has like in 12 stages of psychosocial development, and when you come into your adolescent years, you come into a crisis, it's identity versus role confusion. So you're in that you're in that stage where are you going to be a gat, or are you going to do this trend or this fad? And that's why kind of young people get caught up there. But I think for young people like us, like, I kind of formed the identity of, like, I never felt I was tough or anything like that, but I felt like I had to be. Do you know what I mean? So I had this image then that I'm not really tough, but you know what I'll do? I'll be able to take the most amount of drugs amongst the boys. And that was the identity I fostered for myself, was this, if I can use the label of junkie scumbag, because that's what we kind of were labelled as. But as I got into my adulthood, I was still doing the same thing, walking, like Timmy now, walking the yard, the up and coming group now, or behind me, I'm 26, 27, I still doing the same thing. And it's like, how do you get out of that, But it's just like...
So, boys, how did you? What, like, can you, I suppose I'm not supposed to be asking questions.
Sometimes it's nice to be asked the questions.
I'm really interested to know, like, what was the light switch for you guys? I know you both had different journeys, but what did you have children that you thought, I need to be there for? Did you have the partner? Like, what was it? Or did you just realise that you loved yourself enough and you deserved a bloody shot? Like, what was it?
I think, for me, I think it was a perfect storm of a lot of different conditions. I think down through the years, I had very good people try to help me, but I wasn't ready at that time, you know what I mean? And when you're on a destructive path, you know yourself. If you could do great work with a young person, but when a young person is on the path, most often he has to ride it out, and hopefully he survives it. But like that, I was 27, I was maturing, I was still fucking no life skills or anything like that. I tried treatment a few times, always relapsed on the day when I got out, never had the belief that I could actually, do anything other than what I was doing, There was a pivotal moment that involved two guards, would you believe that? So we were talking about earlier on, like in this area, our relationship with the guards would be very negative for the most part. the Gardaí would be seen as organised people that are not there to help you. If you ever had an issue in the neighbourhood, you wouldn't ring the guards, you'd all sort it out yourselves. That's the kind
street
of
justice.
that type of thing, you know. And the guards were always seen like an outside interference. So, but I had an overdose there, not far from here, and 2 guards came across me, and the guards were like, you know, I was expecting a stop and search. I met him a couple of days after the overdose. I was expecting a stop and search, and they were like, they didn't do that, you know, and they were saying, can you remember the other night you had a bad overdose, you were lucky somebody found you and raised the alarm and we came on the scene, blah blah blah. And I said, look James, we know you a long time now and you're going to be found dead, you need to look after yourself, you need to seek help, you need to blah blah blah. And I come away from there thinking, fuck it, if the guards are showing me compassion here.
I'm pure desperate now.
Oh yeah, I was like, I must be fucked altogether, do you know what I mean? And I rang Merchants Key Ireland 2 days later, and I got into detox St. Francis Farm. Now it took me 6 months, like, but like that again, it was treatment, but the biggest thing I think after was the aftercare I got.
Yeah.
I come into the care of Simon because I was homeless when I came out, and I was minded in a sober house. I had a key worker. They put me on a C scheme cleaning the Simon, and I was minded for the first 12 months. So I had to go through what Timmy spoke about there, not having the vocabulary, not having the confidence, like trying to present in your home city without the drugs to quell all the self-esteem issues, the reason you started using in the first. They're all very magnified in early recovery. You don't have that crutch, but I was minded in that process, and I think that's why I recovered, and it was the help of Narcotics Anonymous and different charities, you know. So that's my story, anyway.
Thanks. And what about you, Timmy, then? For you?
Me, it was probably it was just one moment really for me. You know, I was gone from my wife at the time. We weren't married at the time. She was my partner. We'd 2 kids. There was a barn order out in me. I was your mad bastard that went on a binge for a week after being off it for 6 weeks because he was up to his eyeballs in trouble with the courts, the guards, people in my life. You know, I was out in bail for different stuff, and then, you know, committing crimes then as well in between. But I was just, when I had a drink or a drug, I was just completely out of control. There was anything went. I could be anywhere, do anything, and nothing kind of fazed me because I'd no limit on life. I thought I would be dead by the age of 30, and I really didn't care, you know. And I always revert back to this, and Paul McCartney. It was a front page headline that Paul McGrath had on his on the Sunday World years ago when I was in prison, and it said, "When I drank, I didn't care about my kids," and that just resonated with me. 100.
And you had kids at the time.
I had 2.
Yeah.
But I would have gave my life for my child in the morning back then, because I didn't know what love was. I never experienced love throughout my whole life, you know, and I didn't know what it was. But I knew that's what I thought that was love, you know. But it was just, I got it myself into another scrape. I'd done another robbery. St. Stephen's is there, fucking back in 2011. You know, no family at the time in terms of nobody wanted to be around me, you know. And I got caught for another robbery, you know, and put into a cell. And during the space of me being chased by the guards and arrested and going into the cell and left in the cell, there was one thing came into my mind, and that was I had drugs planted on me. Cheat, that's what we'll say. And that was the only thing that kept me going. Will they ever just leave me alone inside this cell so I can go back into the bag and start using it again? That was all that went through. And when they left the cell, I was completely naked now in the cell because there was I won't go into the details, but they left the cell. I got up, I couldn't find the drugs, so I started crawling around the cell floor, trying to pick up pieces of white ceiling paint on the floor, thinking that there were lumps of crack cocaine or whatever. Not crack cocaine, lumps of cocaine. At the time I wouldn't have been using crack. Yeah. But that was my focus, and I just had this glimpse, my first ever glimpse of true awareness that I knew it was something other than and it's just, what the fuck are you doing here? Like you're inside in a cell, you're going to prison.
You're
You know.
naked crawling around the floor.
Stevens there, like,
And the
your
only
kids are
thing you
home.
can think of is more drugs.
Yeah, and you want to snort bits of ceiling.
Ceiling
Like,
paint, make it worse.
It's mad, isn't
It was just fucking ridiculous. I thought I was the bag was after opening. I was completely psychotic as well at the time. I was completely paranoid. I was put on meds after by the doctor.
But even in that moment of psychosis, you still had the strength of character to say,
this happened.
I've had enough.
That never happened before in my life. I never had awareness. Nothing ever broke through my reality of constant drinking, drug and crime. Never broke through. This was the first ever, and I sat back, and I said, and I got up in the bed in the cell, and I just cried. I cried for the night until I fell asleep.
And that was cathartic.
Yeah.
That was the last time I drank or drugged or gambled or got
I
involved in
think we're
crime.
very lucky that we both kind of had that moment of awareness to think, fucking hell, this
Yeah.
is, you know,
That was my rock bottom.
a lot of
Yeah.
people don't get that awareness,
don't.
and
They
they'll
don't.
use to the end.
Yeah.
know?
And I think that can be the issue, particularly for young people, because they don't get to the age, because you don't hear about criminals retiring and getting old.
They die. They
They
get
die,
murdered or they
or
die
they get
over
murdered,
us
or
or
look
do
at that.
life.
Yeah, you know.
That's the story. There's three options.
Yeah.
They are your three options in my eyes. I was either going to be lifed off,
Yeah.
because I was very violent as well, Trina. I was going to be lifed off. I was going to be murdered. Or I was what? What was the other one? Or probably just inside in a mental institution.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
where I was now at the end.
Yeah.
It was one of the three of them. And if I was to go with three, I thought I would have probably looked at either murdered
Yeah.
or lifed off. Would
yeah.
have been one of the two of them. Like.
Can I ask you a question on
Yeah.
gangland? Because we've about 10 minutes. But,
Yeah, okay.
We don't have the gang culture in Cork like you do in Dublin. You know, we don't have that organised crime element.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Give it time, Jane.
Yeah, I know it's kind of small, kind of pot, but it's very prevalent in Dublin and
And in Drogheda as well.
yeah, but and refer to that K district. You remember that TV show? And I remember I seeing you. It's around Finglas and Blanchardstown, the Gare, the district.
Oh,
you know?
inside the K, yeah.
But when I was looking at that, I couldn't believe, like, they don't need children now, like, and they were wearing fucking
Snow
jeans
boots
worth €1,500 jeans and
The
a
Gucci gang, I think that was. The Gucci gang.
Like how the fuck does some young person get caught up in that, and like how do they get out of it? Do you know?
Yeah, that's the difficult bit, isn't it? Navigating away from it. And that's where we need navigators. We need to look at the Scottish model, say the Violence Reduction Unit in Scotland, where they created youth work navigators and trauma-informed approaches. Because the reality is young people who are in that kind of environment are difficult to deal with. You'll say something that you think is reasonable, and probably 99% of the people in the world think is reasonable, and you'll set that young person off, and that's a trauma response. So what we have to learn is, rather than diagnosing young people with personality disorders or medicating them or calling them ADHD, we need to call it for what it is. That's a trauma response from that person. So we're seeing a trauma response, so this is where we need to provide support, whatever they may be for that individual. And that's hard work, and that's challenging work. So how do young people get involved in it? It can be as easy as, I worked in the inner city of Dublin for a number of years, and I remember looking out my office one afternoon and I saw a young fella being handed something to put into his pocket, and I'd say he was 12, and the older young fella that was maybe about 16 pointing and going like that, and the young fella went off on his bike. So that young fella obviously was dropping something off. Now that young fella, hopefully with support around him, got moved away from that. But the reality is, for some young people, they may not have people around them that can support them because they may be in their own addiction, or they may have their own maybe mental health issues with depression. So they don't have the capacity to support that young people, and that's where we need to step in. And that's very much what I advocate for. So you can be involved in any number of ways. A young person can be involved because they don't feel listened to at home. You know, somebody doesn't have time to listen to them. Maybe parents both have jobs and are time poor. So there may not be the poverty of money, but there may be the poverty of time.
And even for those Gucci lads now, I think something that I was thinking about was, you know, like, we live in a society where it's very materialistic, and we value, you know, having commodities and having the nice things. And for the young people that don't have the legitimate means to acquire those, they still want the same stuff we want.
Of course.
But they're just going to go about it different ways, you know.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
there's another point as well, right? These young lads are 14, 15, and they're growing up looking at the respect all the drug dealers are getting, the cars, the money, the women,
The fear,
you know,
they
the
have.
fear, the respect, you know.
All of the things
These
that
are
they
all
aspire.
human things that
Yeah.
adults,
Yeah.
that human beings want. They want respect.
Yeah.
They want finances, money.
They want
you know,
power.
They want connection. They want to be associated with something that
Yeah.
means
That
something,
matters.
and where they feel the same as. That's very important.
Or better than.
Yeah.
And I think for young people growing up where there is a perceived lack of opportunity to achieving wealth through illegitimate means, and you've got this opportunity, like if you're working a full-time job and you're an apprentice plumber, what do you get? Maybe $350 a week?
If you're lucky, yeah.
If you're lucky, right? So if you're a young fella and somebody says, drop that bag up there, stand up there and stay hello, so call out if anybody's coming, and I'll give you 500 a week. Like, and you don't see yourself being able to get any further than just being a plumber. Not to say, I mean, plumbers are very important jobs, but you want the wealth that you're seeing that they have.
Yeah.
And when you don't have that critical thinking piece, because they will tell you, don't worry about it, you'll only get a caution, you won't get a conviction. They don't tell you that if you go into criminal justice, into youth justice at that time, it will affect whether you can do, work with kids when you're later, or whether you can travel, or whether you can get a visa to certain countries. So they're manipulated, and their vulnerability is taken advantage of.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different ways, James.
Yeah.
But because there's lots of different ways we can intervene. And that's the piece that I think we need to do some work on as a country.
But I think there's another podcast in you, Trina. And no, it was great talking to you.
And you.
Thanks for coming down from
Oh,
Dublin.
thanks, guys. Thank you.
No, I really appreciate you taking the time out. I know, it was a lot of travel. So look, I hope you enjoy your bit of grub in Princess Street tonight.
We are, and it's like a holiday for me. It's the furthest I've been in 16 months.
I know, it's great to get out, isn't
fabulous.
it? We're going up to
Fabulous.
Wexford tomorrow to meet somebody as well. So
lovely.
we're actually looking forward to the three of us get on the road and
Yeah.
have a bit of crack,
Yeah.
It's been a rough whole year, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. So look, enjoy your evening, and
you.
thanks again.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
mate.
And
Thanks,
thank you,
Timmy.
Trina.
thanks to everybody that watches and supports us. Thanks, Timmy.
Thanks, everyone.
And thanks to Rowan on the decks. And we see you all next week.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't forget to head over to the Patreon if you'd like to help us. Thanks again.